Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the lunch and you are not very sleepy at the moment. So I'm Javier Pérez. I'm the head of data at CARTO. And I want to welcome you to this panel about how to improve spatial models with new location data streams. So I have the honor to be sitting here next to 5 excellent professionals from 5 different data providers. So I have Frode from Unacast, Janine from Mapillary, Adam from Foursquare, Edward from Mastercard, and Lauren from Safegraph. And to start with, I think we can take 1-2 minutes each of you to present a bit what you do at your company, and especially what data are you offering in the market. So we can start with you.
Yeah, so at Unicast, we're a mobility data company. So we're building a data layer of how people move about in the real world. Coming up from the raw GPS traces or telco data into who are visiting stores, what's the traffic in different neighborhoods and cities alike. So yeah, just really trying to build a sound data layer that others can make decisions from.
I'm Janine. I run operations at Mapillary. We are a street-level imagery platform for extracting geospatial data for automating and scaling up maps. So we currently have about 800 million images in our database today, from which we've pulled out, using machine learning techniques, about 50 billion objects. So you can imagine it's quite an interesting data problem for us to figure out how to manage and handle this sort of scale.
So at Foursquare, we have a variety of products across the MarTech area and the developer platform area, where we try to be a location layer for developers. The most interesting data sets we have are our point of interest and map data set, which is very large, as well as a lot of foot traffic data of where people go and what kind of behaviors they're having, which we use across both the MarTech side and in supporting developers.
So I'm Ed Lee. I'm the data scientist for Mastercard, but it's the Mastercard Center for Inclusive Growth. So my mission is to take our Mastercard transactional data assets, that's basically anytime anybody swipes the card, we capture that information. And my goal is to take that transactional data and the insights that we derive from that for social good.
Hi, I'm Lauren Spiegel. I'm head of product at Safegraph, and we focus on places. So we have a database of over 6 million points of interest in US and Canada. Think of it as where people spend time or money, so schools, Starbucks, all sorts of businesses. And we have the basic information, name, address, brand, open hours, and then we have aggregated geospatial data, so how many devices visited a Starbucks in the last month, what census block do they come from, how long do they hang out, how far did they come from. So it's a up-to-date, really curated, clean data set of places for people to build and do analysis on.
Thank you. So to start with the conversation, I want to ask you about use cases. So traditionally, we have seen a lot of location data being used for ad tech, for marketing, geomarketing purposes. But we're seeing at the moment more different industries getting interested and started to do analysis using location data. We see it in retail, we see it in real estate, in insurance. So I wanted to ask you, what are those new use cases that are starting to arise and new industries that are getting interest in your data? So maybe to start, we can, Adam, I think Foursquare has a very interesting story about having to pivot a bit the business model. So.
Yeah, Foursquare is definitely on both sides of this thing. We have MarTech products and attribution and audience segments and things like that, and also some of the other areas you mentioned, financial data. But a lot of what we do is on the developer platform side, where we're trying to build a location layer using this data for other developers to work with. So some interesting use cases there are around our places and point of interest data, where people in the travel sector and hotel sector or mapping sector can use that data to build out features or make use of our search abilities and things like that. We also have the Foursquare Pilgrim SDK, which is a mobile developer library that unlocks real-time location behavior, and that can help with user engagement for any sort of app that uses location, whether it's gaming or retail or anything like that. So the same location behavior that does help us on the MarTech side, we try to use for whatever number of consumer-facing applications developers can leverage it for.
Okay. And Janine, what about in Mapillary?
So I think I've been very fortunate to be at Mapillary for a few years now, and just over the past few years, we've actually seen how people who may not really understand what spatial data is starting to realize that there are geographical and geo aspects to some of the data sets they work with. So for example, we'll have hedge funds who come to us expecting CSV files of like commodity prices or something. And then more recently, they come back to us with more sophisticated requests around, well, it isn't just about understanding how commodities look across historically, but it's useful to understand how brands are represented across the world, whether it's from, for example, logos that you can detect in different regions of the world, or different ways that you can actually use the spatial data infrastructure to understand what this means. In the insurance vertical, this may not immediately sound like something that needs geospatial data, but from our experience, we have folks coming to us asking for, building materials, like ways that they can detect risk in resilient cities to actually understand how to model out risk for insurance planning purposes. So I really think it's starting to come to the forefront in a lot of these like adjacent industries.
Nice. And I also want to ask you this question to you, Edward, because you're coming more from looking to use cases around social good. So maybe you can tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, certainly. So, at Mastercard, our claim to fame is the level of transactional data that we have. Especially, it's around the world, but in the US, it's actually, it's very robust. So what we do with that data is that we, of course, we aggregate it and we anonymize it, and we really try to glean usable insights from that. So one specific use case that I could think of right away is the latest project that I've worked on, and it's tried to promote inclusive growth in the city of New Orleans using our data, using our spend data. So what we did is there's a very poor, dilapidated neighborhoods in the city of New Orleans. It's called the Claiborne Corridor, and it's a section that was ravished when in the 1960s a highway basically just cut right through the neighborhood, essentially destroying this very vibrant community, and it never really recovered until after Katrina in 2005. That's when a lot of money came into the city, to that area, to try to help out that neighborhood. So the question always has been, whatever programs that's enacted, is it working? The community services, the programs that we're putting in place, is that working? So that's actually where our data came into play. We can actually, we have a good 4 or 5 years of history in terms of the transactional data per the merchant within that geospatial grid, that area, and we can actually just tell, well, you know what? We're, on a month-by-month study, we're seeing that, yes, whatever programs that you did, it's working especially well in the year 2018, especially towards the end, because we're seeing growth in that specific region to be much higher than, let's say, the rest of the city of New Orleans. In fact, in my study, we found that in terms of just the spend volume at the merchants within this impoverished area actually grew 12 times faster than the rest of the city of New Orleans. So that's actually where our data could come into play. It's up-to-date data, right? I'm not going to say real time, but it's close enough for people, for decision makers and policymakers to really react upon those insights that we can provide. And just to add one more data point to this is that we can also tell which stores are open and which store has been closed. So again, within this area that I just talked about, the Claiborne Corridor, we plotted the number of new businesses that opened up year by year, and we do see an acceleration. It actually fits into our data insights to say, yes, whatever programs, whatever incentives that you guys are doing in that neighborhood, it's working. Keep it up.
Thank you. So second topic that I want to bring to this conversation is about privacy. We have seen in the last year a lot of mainstream news talking about data privacy and how or the individual can be exposed or not. We have seen legal changes with GDPR in Europe, also the law in California about to also get applied. So I want to know how is this affecting your companies, your business models, and what your data scientists are having to do to ensure this, that you fulfill these all legal changes. So maybe Frode can say.
So working directly with location data, typically from mobile phones, etc., it's obviously something you have to be very respectful of, and we really, really welcome more regulation and being stringent in this area. Coming from, as being a Norwegian company from the grounds as well, probably come a little bit further back in Europe than here still. And actually the moment that GDPR made this, stepped into place, we actually moved into Europe. Doing that, there was actually not that much of a difference we had to make in terms of our infrastructure. Most were kind of just sound engineering principles and being respectful with the data, using it the right way. Kind of we want this industry to be here for a long time. These data sets are really, really powerful when used right, so we just want to build it the right way. And when, say, we're working with a large telco back in the Nordics called Telia, where we are their processor, so we're processing their data such that they can build inside products. Then they actually have researchers from Sweden actually attacking our data in terms of trying to re-identify persons. So they're really being stringent about trying to improve and make sure that we are doing the right thing here.
I'm sure Safegraph will also have something to say about privacy using also similar types of data sources.
Well, we're getting in the geolocation data, which we have to make sure we're mindful that we're complying with all laws as they're evolving, and the California landscape is changing quickly. But then the product that we sell is actually it's aggregated and anonymized to places. So for our customers, they don't have to worry as much about having this highly sensitive information. So we're providing a lot of value taking this data that they might not want on their servers, and it's actually a lot of data volume, synthesizing it down to a much smaller workable data set that's also completely anonymized. Like we take pains to, for instance, if we're seeing less than 5 devices from a certain census block group to a POI, we just exclude that census block group to highlight the privacy. What I do find personally is where the whole privacy dimension is going is I actually find that if we get better technologies and open source frameworks that implement differential privacy or federated encrypted learning, I think that's an opportunity for people to get a lot of insights from the data while maintaining privacy. And I know that's down the road, but there's an open source framework called PySIFT. Then if things like that catch on, I actually think that there's a way for us to extract a lot of value and make sure we're maintaining privacy.
And what about in Mastercard? It's different type of data, but also privacy is a concern.
Absolutely. I'm going to sound like a lawyer as opposed to a data scientist. Is that at Mastercard we really value our partners' privacy, and our partners are actually everyone who carries a Mastercard, as well as our merchant partners and banking partners. So that's the lawyer part that I talked about. So everything that we do, it is aggregated and anonymized. And just like Lauren, our challenge is to really find that balance, right? The balance of really keeping your privacy and our partner's privacy versus the insights that we can really try to glean out. So I spend a lot of my time actually talking with the lawyers and coming up with the proper specs to make sure that that all areas are covered. So it is actually, from my perspective, it's a big part of my job to make sure that the privacy aspect of things are considered. And I think it's actually and I'll speak for myself, so I've been with the Center for Inclusive Growth for 2 years, and these 2 years I've been working so closely with the lawyers. For me, it's actually part of my job because I do want to make sure that the data that we use is useful, it is helpful for social good or for everybody here to make money, but it's just that to have that understanding of the underlying data and how that was derived, and you can actually sort of explain that to the lawyers, that actually helps me to really glean more insights, more useful insights for our business partners.
I had said lawyers many, many times in that answer. Sorry, I don't spend, I try not to spend too much time with lawyers, but it is necessary. But I think you raised a really good point. It shouldn't be viewed as a necessary evil. it's like something we actually value and actually does actually add value to our product. At Mapillary, I think the way we've approached it, even though at the beginning it did seem daunting to need to comply with GDPR rules, we're also a European company, so was quite early in adopting this. The idea is that we can actually make offerings that help people to actually comply with some of these requirements. So as an example, we have blurring technology that can help people actually comply with privacy requirements more easily. All that being said, I remember, so we're in the navigation space, and we work a lot with self-driving cars. I remember going to a conference in China, for example, and like the kind of demos and achievements that they can achieve in China with their very different standards of privacy protection is leaps ahead. So I think it's very interesting to think about like how can we actually, understanding these very reasonable requirements that we have, actually attack innovation in the same way while making sure that the right balance is struck. So certainly something that we had to think of in some of these areas that we work in.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, like I think regulation, that's kind of the lawyer's side. Like I know there's a lot of data scientists here, and I think that is more regulation is more the starting line. It's more about doing what you think is right. And having that as the layer. A data engineer back in Oslo has a really good quote that I like in terms of designing data sets such that you cannot answer the questions you do not want answered. And be cautious about that when building data sets.
In fact, I want to talk about this now because we have this auditorium packed of data scientists, and you being data providers, you do have a lot of data scientists in-house. So I want to know, I want to ask you about which are the challenges that your data scientists are having right now in-house to build your data products. Yeah.
So for us, that is really about the more aggregated products, the more insights. Like we are trying to climb the abstraction layers such that other companies don't have to spend all the time going from like the source data into the insights data. But like I think there's been a trend throughout the day here in the talks that just too much time in ETL and doing that first kind of processing. So we want to help people making decisions by stepping up those ladders. But doing that, there has to be a trust in the data as well that it does represent, and all our data sets, like coming from different angles, they have some strengths, some weaknesses, and that needs to be presented well in the data, as well as just making it more accessible. It's, I think we're still 5-10 years away from the standard that it's going to be in terms of representing these data sets and the abstraction layers that we want, and we're just continuously pushing towards that.
You, Adam? I mean, you run a lot of data science activities at Foursquare.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what was just said. I think interpretability and usability of the data is always very important. And we have a lot of really interesting data internally that we know how to use and we know how to understand, but we need to expose that, whether it's through various APIs or other data offerings. And so a lot of the effort is around trying to standardize things, trying to make sure things are clear and usable, and that everyone else is using them the way we are, so that then when they see something unintuitive, they can understand that it's for a real reason, and they can see what the actual intuition underneath it is. I think that comes up a lot, especially in the API space, where any number of different applications and any number of different verticals are all using the same underlying data, and you have to try to expose it in different ways so that they can make sense of it.
It's ironic that our mission at Safegraph is to provide clean data sets so that data scientists can get going and working faster and not having to collect them themselves. And I asked my main data scientist what his biggest problem is, and he said it's getting clean data sets, because when he's building a model, he has to put together a validation set and a test set, and putting that together is actually what's taking up most of his time. For instance, he's building a classifier right now to classify different points of interest for what category they are. Are they a restaurant? Are they a sailing school? Like, the number of categories is about 180. And if you get some bad examples in the training set, then your model's going to learn that and get bad data out. So it is a process of us ourselves, like finding and cleaning and taking data sets so that we can then add attributes to our data set.
And who is on the other side? So to which type of departments, users, do you see using your data more? Have you seen any trend over there, Janine?
So in terms of the types of end users using our data, we certainly are focused on developers who use our APIs, but we also try to like go downstream a little bit more to see if there are end business users who are able to use the data more directly, even if they aren't really good at programming, for example. So I really agree with what you were saying about how we see this across API products, especially where it's designed to be quite horizontal. So I think from a first cut, what you get out of our system is sort of this fire hose of data that you can extract from street level imagery. And I think the challenge for us is to figure out how we can package and position it so users who aren't necessarily as comfortable with spatial data as we are able to actually use it and maneuver it to address some of those use cases that we started out this conversation with. And I think some of the best data scientists that I've seen at work aren't only people who are very adept at managing large amounts of data and squeezing insights out of it, but are also very good at understanding how to position it and package it in a way that makes sense to an end user.
What about you, Edward? So who you see using your data at the moment?
I'm sorry, can you repeat?
Yeah, so which type of departments in the organizations that buy your data are more common?
So the question is which departments within MasterCard you're saying, or?
No, outside Mastercard, so your customers.
I'm sorry. So basically our end customer,
Yeah.
who would be our end users? In my case, it's actually very, I guess in my position, I'm really unique within MasterCard because I am trying to do use data for social good. So the data and the insights that the data and its insights where we derived our insights from, that really, we're really trying to target the policymakers, the decision makers. So that could be a local government, could be a community leaders, could be the local small business alliance, and up to the mayor's office. Our whole point there is, whatever insights that we give out, that we provide, we really wanted to make a positive impact on that said community. So, so that's actually the main audience that I'm trying to aim for. But that's one aspect. There's another thought that I have, is which in this case the end users would be the masses, everybody. And what I mean by that is we're currently during the time of a natural disaster, let's say a hurricane. The latest example would be Hurricane Dorian that hit Florida and South Carolina and North Carolina. So when the hurricane comes, what happens to the stores along the area that's been hit? Well, we actually sort of know that, right? Because from MasterCard, we can actually tell when a card was last swiped at that specific merchant by the coast of Florida. And because we have that information, we can actually sort of give a status, if you will, of the merchant status within those hit areas. So that comes in really handy for let's say, auto fuel, gas stations. We actually could say, well, right now the gas station X is open by this coast. Here's the lat long. Here's the address. So if you're driving to evacuate from your home, you can go to that gas station. And as of yesterday, we know that it's open. So that's the type of. So that's another aspect which I do want to push that forward to, and hopefully in that case, then the end user would be, like I said, everyone.
So now on the last few minutes that we have for this session, I want to ask, what does the future hold for your business? What do you think is going to be the next big thing, and especially for location data? Maybe Lauren, take this one.
We're very focused on the future being able to join many data sets together, because once you start asking questions and looking at data, you want to bring in something else to answer more and more questions. So we think that right now there's a lot of different data in different silos, and we want to figure out a way to organize it, and we're organizing it around the concept of a place. So the idea is that if you want to know, if you want to get insights on why a business had to do planning for, say, a grocery store, you want to know the weather, you want to know the foot traffic, you want to know the spending history, you want to know all these attributes about a place, and right now it's very difficult to get those all together, and we think that by making it easy to connect data sets, you can unlock a ton of value. So that's what we see where the future is going to help organize data.
Good. This is exactly what we're trying to do as well, CARTO, so very good. Janine?
I think the next big thing for the kind of data, especially from our point of view, is just faster, more. I think, Ed, you said something about how your data sets are fresh, I think, but not quite real time. And I think we're sort of in the same boat in that, like, we collect imagery and there's a processing time and we spit it out. But, like, how do you actually capture street level imagery and actually extract data to the minute, to the second, so it's actually useful to, like, somebody who's driving and turning the corner and needs to know that something's actually happening in real time? Or how do we actually apply real-time analysis to things like understanding how much foot traffic there is outside of Nordstrom's at the second? So I think we're getting to the point where we want to really push the boundaries on a temporal level on what kind of data that we can manage, which just means, like, exponentially more scale than we handle today even.
Yeah, and kind of the fact our data sets together here, like, compared to, like, the more census data sets or the more static data sets, they're live, right? You can see changes if the weather had an impact, or as we did back in Oslo with the telco data, we saw a bus line change and see how much later people actually got into work the next morning, and also the week later, because information wasn't good enough. And just going further and further and making that data available, abstraction layers in terms of being closer to the kind of human questions that you asked, and as Lauren said, like, combining data sets, like the Mastercard data set or our data set, like, alone can only answer a subset of questions, so it has to be, like, connectable together, and yeah.
Thank you. Well, I think our time is up, so thank you very much for joining us today and willing to participate in this panel to share your view on where the location data industry is going, and also thanks all of you for your attention and support. I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference and the entire day. So thank you.